I just thought it might be quite useful, just ahead of passing over to the speakers, just to do a local labour market update. Just kind of an anecdotal one, actually, just in terms of what we're seeing at the moment. It's funny old times in terms of the labour market at the moment, and kind of unexpected versus what you might be hearing in the press about kind of mass redundancies and a real lack of jobs. We're actually locally, we're finding, yes, we are seeing redundancies, but maybe not the mass redundancies that other parts of the country are seeing. And actually, we're still seeing a lot of recruitment activity, a lot of companies looking for people across the board, whether that's, I mean, particularly here at Recruitment, we're super busy. December's normally a quieter time for us, actually. And actually, this year, we're busier than we were last year at the same time. Particularly industrial temps, so factories, seem to be really busy, and that can either be, we're seeing a mixture of companies either having an increase in demand or catching up on demand maybe from earlier in the year, or also kind of a bit of the pre-Brexit rush for export to get product shipped in case there are any problems at port come January. And so yeah, so on the permanent side of recruitment, we're seeing a little bit quieter, as we normally would expect in January, in December, but also having had a national lockdown, so that's not a surprise at all. But still the same skill shortages as we were seeing as we have been for the last few years. So IT and engineering, still skill shortages in those areas. And it's really interesting, actually, from a candidate perspective. So as I say, the jobs market is actually still quite buoyant, but actually the candidate activity is a lot lower this year than it was this time last year, which is kind of surprising. Less people applying for jobs across both temporary and permanent roles. So we're kind of putting that down on the permanent side, maybe to people wanting to stay where they are. If they're in a job, stay where they are, don't want to take the risk of moving. Maybe see how the land lies in the new year. So for roles where we'd normally advertise and get a lot of response, we're having to kind of do a bit more headhunting at the moment. And then also even unskilled industrial temp roles. I'm in touch with the DWP and the local job centres regularly, and they're really finding they've got a problem at the moment. There's a lot of people claiming benefits, because there are no penalties for people not proactively seeking work at the moment. So people are kind of choosing not to do that. So it is a funny market. It's a really strange time. But yeah, I just thought I'd share that, because contrary to popular demand, we're just not inundated with people at the moment. So or popular beliefs rather. So yeah, so I have got lots of stats. I've received today the monthly report on jobs that I get from our governing body, the REC. There's one for the UK and one for the Midlands, which kind of reflects the same as what I've been saying. So if anyone wanted that report and some stats on that, I can share that, that's fine. And if anyone wants any advice on a particular skill area or job type, then I'd be happy to advise if you wanted to get in touch. So that's it from me. I'll hand back to you, Az. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Laura. I am going to put Laura's details on the follow-up email if you would like to get in touch with her. But thank you for your support with this event, Laura. There we go. Off to our next speaker. So I'd like to introduce Darryll from MFG Solicitors, and he's going to share social media over lockdown. So thank you, Darryll.
Hi, everyone. Good to finally be attending one of these events. I'm just going to attempt to share my slides, which went well in the sort of, do we call it warm up? Yeah, the run through. So can everyone see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I'm going to be talking about social media and lockdown in particular. Obviously, social media hasn't changed a great deal since lockdown commenced. social media, there's no new forms of social media, but what we've identified as solicitors are different risks associated with it as a result of the whole lockdown situation, with people working from home, other forms of social media that perhaps weren't so relevant previously have now become much more relevant. And so we just want to put out there a few problems that we've particularly identified and noted, and a lot of these are inquiries that we have received from clients as well. So these are real live issues. So we'll just go into slideshow.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to be looking at in this order are the forms of what we consider relevant social media, particular problems that then arise with social media from lockdown and the use of it, relevant policies that you might want to consider. And then I can't do a HR forum in December without some form of discussion around Christmas and Christmas parties, which are now taking place with social media. And then just a few points on dealing with misuse of social media. So the relevant forms of social media that I'm really looking at here are LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, and then sort of video conferencing, calling, Zoom, Skype, Microsoft Teams. And fundamentally, it's probably the bottom two that sort of have come to far more prominence as a result of lockdown than the first three, albeit there are other issues arising generally from lockdown and social media. So obviously we're all aware that current government guidelines mean that face-to-face networking and marketing, training such as an event like this, and other such corporate events aren't and have not been able to take place since March, April. And you'd probably be pretty brave if you invested any money in organising a live face-to-face event anytime, probably in the first quarter, first half of next year. So obviously, in a hurry, people have had to diversify in how they market, or they quite simply completely disappear from the market. Many businesses, as a business entity, particularly professional businesses, will have had a social media presence on mainly LinkedIn, Twitter. Some have Facebook pages. So many organizations will have had a presence, but in professional organizations, accountants, lawyers, for example, it's the individual sort of solicitors and partners within those businesses that are the ones that need to be creating personal relationships. So that is a major part of what we're sort of going to be looking at today, is that a lot of people have had to start doing social media that may perhaps not previously have been exposed to it. So particular problems arising. So online and remote marketing and networking has subsequently been elevated to far greater significance than ever before. If you're not doing it online now, then you effectively, given how long this has been going on for, disappear from everyone's minds, and you just disappear from the marketplace, essentially. There are many employees holding positions that require networking, working or marketing, that may have been very, very effective in sort of face-to-face events, lunches, organised business drinks and things like that, but have no experience of using social media at all for this purpose. And, I know a number of, very well-regarded senior people in various businesses who don't really have an active LinkedIn account, so have no social media presence or experience of it. And it's those people that have really had to adapt very quickly. There's a lot of people within any workplace that do a lot of social media, and for them this has been a much easier transition. So social media may be second nature for many, but to those that it's not, the etiquette and rules of conduct of such activities may not be quite so obvious. So, you know, how to even send a tweet, what's appropriate language to use, how to set up a LinkedIn account. The general rules: don't sort of use your profile picture with, you stood in a bar surrounded by beers. It needs to be a professional type picture. So there are a lot of things that many people will see as quite basic elements that people who aren't used to this forum simply won't have a clue about. And there's a risk then that they will go cold in the marketplace, that they will post things on social media that will reflect on your business that isn't really appropriate for social media. Taking action against an employee for any failures in this respect is likely to prove quite difficult if you don't have a social media policy, if you don't identify those people that are unable or inexperienced in this area and provide them with a degree of training. So as an example, most of my department, the employment team, are fairly up to speed with social media. We've all got very active LinkedIn profiles, and we use Twitter, Facebook and whatever. But we still undertook a couple of hours of detailed training on how to get the most out of LinkedIn and the rules of etiquette for things like that. So it is something that many people will struggle with. A problem that has been particularly identified that we've had issues with is that with many employees being based at home, there is a significant risk that attitudes of employees will become far more relaxed. They're not in a professional environment, and it's much easier to act in a much more casual and unprofessional manner. There's also the case that many employees now working from home may not have business equipment. They may not have a business supplied laptop. They may not have a business supplied mobile phone. And therefore, if all they're doing is logging into various forms of social media using their own devices, then as far as they're concerned, they're doing their own thing, and they can do what they want with their own devices, which of course is not the case if they're representing your business when they're doing that. Another particular problem is that it will become much more difficult for employers to monitor and control social media activity when employees are based remotely, often until it's too late and things, tweets or LinkedIn posts have gone out there, because the management structure on a day-to-day basis isn't there. So, and with employees using, again, their own devices, then the risk is far more intensified. Therefore, it is fundamentally important to have correct policies in place. Obviously, a social media policy is absolutely fundamental, but also to have checks and balances before posts are authorised. So, again, as an example, we've got an employment team Twitter feed and other such things. So we don't have the whole team with access to be able to post tweets on that Twitter feed. We have one designated person who can post tweets on that Twitter feed. And to do that, there has to be authorization from head of department. They can't just spot something in the news and feel, well, I'm just going to tweet that. We have checks and balances before we publish anything publicly. So it's absolutely imperative that whilst encouraging people to engage on social media, you maintain that element of control and management, because if you don't have those things in place and people post things that they shouldn't post, it'll be very difficult to subsequently discipline someone or take any action when they've been offered no guidance or control in that respect. Another problem that we've identified through inquiries we've received from clients is that many people may struggle to disengage from social media and find themselves permanently active, unsociable hours outside business hours, because again, if they're using their own devices particularly, they're scrolling the internet, something pops up on their LinkedIn app and they continue with that. But there are some people with that type of personality who will just keep going with things like that. And whilst we think of health and safety as more a physical, on the premises in the workplace issue, then in these circumstances, you need to diversify how you think about that. You also need to keep an eye on your employees' activities. If it becomes apparent that there are LinkedIn posts or if you've got a business Facebook account or Twitter account, that there's activity at really strange hours or there's no evidence of switching off, then you do have a responsibility still to your employees, even though they may just be sat on their sort of sofa or lying in bed doing it. You do have a responsibility to sort of say to your employees that they do need to disconnect and take their evening and not be engaged on that sort of activity long into the night. One of the biggest problems, and this has led to more serious disciplinary issues, is the fact that with workforces being split apart, people who work closely together in teams and so on, all being based remotely to each other, there has been a huge surge in workplace teams setting up private chat groups, mainly via WhatsApp. These are extremely difficult to manage unless they're set up. So, for instance, every department within our firm has got a formal WhatsApp group chat set up through their head of department, and all heads of departments are on that chat and are active in it. Now, of course, that doesn't stop splinter groups of employees within that group setting up their own subgroups for chats, and it's extremely difficult to monitor. I don't know, there may be people within our team that have set up other chats, they've not invited me, but you can't really manage that. The difficulty is that, as I would normally explain at this time of year, when you set up Christmas parties and things like that, if the fundamental basis of that grouping of people is their role, their workplace, then things said and discussed on those group chats become a workplace problem. And again, it's very easy because if people had set up email groups in the workplace, your IT policies would cover that and things can be checked and it's a breach of that side of things. But if people have set up these groups due to lockdown because they're not seeing each other whilst they are all working remotely, then it's a very difficult thing for employers to manage and ensure that there is nothing amiss with it, which again is why it's absolutely important to have appropriate policies. But whilst you can't control that, you can mitigate the potential effect and damage to yourselves by reminding employees, by accepting these things may well be happening and reminding employees of your various policies, your bullying, harassment, dignity at work, anti-discrimination, things like that. If you as an employer can show that you've done the best you can to mitigate these events happening, then the liability against you would be substantially limited. Video-based networking or calls such as today's event and many other networking groups. I've got friends who are in BNI groups and they now will take place via mass video calls, Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever. And again, as set out earlier, it's extremely difficult sometimes for people to maintain professional boundaries when they are sat like me right now in my kitchen working from home. So it is extremely important to ensure that employees are reminded that they need to be presenting themselves in a professional manner on these forums. So I fell foul of this a couple of weeks ago, not so much in a networking event, but I had an employment tribunal hearing, which they decided to do by video. So I basically put a shirt on and then wore my jogging bottoms and slippers and sat at my kitchen table and thought that would be fine and completely forgot about things. And then partway through the video call, the judge was getting quite a lot of feedback. So he asked everyone to remove their mobile phones from the vicinity, and completely forgetting what I was wearing, I then got up and walked across my kitchen to put things on the other side of the room. So it would have been quite apparent that whilst the top half of me was well presented, the bottom half certainly wasn't. So, you know, it is a simple basic thing, but if people want to present a professional viewpoint, then they need to be reminded that they dress that way, which today I have gone to the effort of putting on full work costume. So I've got trousers on as well, you'll be pleased to know, but hopefully I won't be needed to walk across the room. The other issue then, going back to video calls, is social events. Obviously there's a small section coming up on Christmas drinks, Christmas parties, but people will be organising, and I know from first-hand invites, birthday drinks, leaving drinks, many other things are being organised via video call. And you as the employer, because people aren't buzzing around the office talking about what's going on and what's happening, if you're not in the loop with your staff and various teams, then you may have absolutely no idea that one of these events is planned. But they're, again, a work-based grouping of people, and it will be considered a workplace event. Now, obviously with these events, people will be sat there drinking. They're not limited by having to leave to get the last train home, a taxi home, bars closing, which often breaks up the night. They can go all night if they want, and I've seen examples of people actually doing so, and they end up, you know, extremely drunken, and there is a huge risk of inappropriate conversation and chat. So again, you can't control these things, but you can mitigate your position by reminding employees that if they engage in this sort of social behaviour, then it could be a workplace issue, and they need to be reminded of your policies in respect of dignity at work and disciplinary and matters such like that. And in fact, I was dealing with an inquiry just yesterday from a client of ours who is in fact organising a Christmas party for all their staff as a Zoom call or Microsoft Teams, and they're actually giving everyone a fairly sizable financial budget for them to go out and buy food and drink for that party. So obviously there's no ambiguity there, that's quite clearly a work-based party, but they've got a degree of control over that because it is centrally organised, as opposed to various groups of departments or people organised in their own Christmas gathering. So they are some of the main issues we've identified just through calls from clients and other things, just putting our heads together. So in terms of policies you might want to consider, and none of these are anything new or anything you won't have. They're policies you should all probably have in place. The most important, of course, is a social media policy, and that really should be clearly accessible to all your employees, and they should be reminded of the terms of that policy and what to do if they've got any concerns about it. You may want to have a home working policy for wider reasons than just social media use, but it may set out professional boundaries to be adhered to when attending a video call, for example, and when corresponding with people via various messaging systems. You will, of course, want your IT misuse and monitoring policies, and people should be reminded of those. But of course, it's much more difficult if people are using their own devices, because you as a business haven't got the infrastructure to provide everyone with a business phone, business laptop. Anti-bullying, harassment, or dignity at work policies. Again, it's always worth reminding people of those, and if you haven't got one or any of them, you should have them. Health and safety policy, just going back to the point I made a little earlier about what we often see this as something for physical injury in the workplace, but if you've got people working from home, then you may want to have a look at that as to whether it needs to be amended to legislate for online activity outside sociable hours. And then finally, disciplinary and grievance policies might need to be looked at to, again, we're in a very different way of working 6 months ago. So disciplinary and grievance policies may need to be tweaked to reflect it, where you have your list of matters you consider gross misconduct, whether you sort of bring in more relevant points to the current methods of working. So Christmas, whilst we can't all go out and have parties and drinks, I can guarantee you that someone on this call will have a workforce who will be organising, unbeknown to them, a Christmas party of some sort remotely. And as I've said, these can go on long into the night and become equally as drunken as an actual party, if not more so. And again, boundaries are far lower because there may not be management there. You're not in a designated place that's been organised by the company. You're sat in your living room or your spare bedroom. And so it's very difficult to put your workplace head on and think about what you're saying sometimes. So I think it is important that the usual rules that I would advise people to do around Christmas are considered, even though we're in this situation. And that is that you may want to tweak what you normally send out about behaviour at Christmas gatherings and Christmas party to, again, particularize it for these circumstances. But I still think this year it's worthwhile, because you don't know what could be going on, reminding people of their behaviour. Then finally, I just need to deal with misuse of social media. So, you know, there are many stats that say how many people are involved in social media issues. We, as an employment team, are routinely dealing with concerns from employers of how their employees use their social media. We've had complaints of particularly LinkedIn, employees using that to almost as some form of dating sites, you know, starting to private message people who they see come up on their people you may know thread, and using it as their own personal dating site when the site is clearly, you know, linked to that company as their employer. So there are clear issues there, and again, it's far easier to sit behind a keyboard and say things that you wouldn't say in person. As I've already pointed out, employment laws will apply even when the employee is somewhere other than the workplace. And it's important that action is taken as soon as conduct comes to light. Any delays can suggest that you've accepted their conduct or you've waived the breach that their conduct is. It's easy for an employer, obviously, if the conduct is witnessed at an event. So again, if there were a Zoom Christmas party and someone said something ridiculously inappropriate, there would be witnesses. If it's a one-on-one video call, it's much more difficult. But as soon as the business becomes aware of the post or the conduct, then it should take action to remove and deal with the problem. So, practical tips: ensure that all business policies are up to date, which we've already covered. Ensure that you have a comprehensive social media policy. That is really more important than ever. Ensure that employees are aware of proper use of social media, and consider training. Like anything else, you can't blame people for doing something wrong if you've not told them what's right or wrong. Even if it might seem bleedingly obvious, it is a fairly good defense to an employee to say, well, they never gave me training, I've never been exposed to this before, I've just been sent away to work from home for 6 months and I don't know what I'm doing. And also to keep an eye on employees' social media accounts, not just for misconduct, but again, for unsocial working practices as much as anything else. As I've already said, take action swiftly and operate an open door policy so that if people are offended by what they've read or what's been sent on a WhatsApp group, it's quite easy for people to send silly videos and things like that that may not seem immediately offensive but will offend a particular person. People need to know that they can report it without any repercussions. Any sort of WhatsApp messages, anything uploaded online is obviously very good evidence in a disciplinary process. Obviously, before you notify the employee of your concerns, it's probably advisable to screenshot anything you can because it will be deleted pretty quickly. And normally any connections from the workplace, particularly on, say, Facebook, will be blocked or deleted quite quickly as well. It's also advisable to make sure that all levels of management are trained in the use of social media, and that employees, as always, are treated consistently and fairly with each other, as you would with any form of disciplinary process. And that's it. I think we take questions at the end. So,
yeah, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Darren. Thanks for presenting to us today. If anyone does have any questions for Darryll in the meantime, please pop them in the group chat and we can address those at the end of the webinar. But thanks, Darryll. If you wouldn't mind closing your screen down.
Yeah, I'm just stopping.
There we are. Perfect. Great. So I'd like to hand over to Ruth from Processio Solutions, who's going to be covering designing jobs for business success. Thanks, Ruth.
Apologies, just getting my right screen to share with you. There we go. Can we see that?
Yes.
Super. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to talk to you about jobs, because we all love jobs, and take you back to some of the principles of what we might be looking at with jobs, considering the changes that we've had with this year and moving forward into 2021 with a positive idea of how we might be able to improve things and make your business even more successful in 2021. Just a quick bit about me. I've been a HR professional, line manager, I've done a variety of different roles. I set up my own business last summer. Not the best timing, but hey, you've got to do it sometime. So I had Processio Solutions, which is HR business change and supporting with reward. And then I have a Get Ruthless business, which is more focused on individual careers and CV support, more for individuals than businesses. From a personal point of view, we came up with the Dawson Jones first, by the way, they copied us, just so you know. And for those who are Bake Off followers, we have 2 Shebas, just like David, so we did like his Sheba cake in particular. So what's a job? Now everybody knows what the job is. There's a job, we all do a job, but what I want to just take you back to is some principles of where the jobs actually fit in your organisation and why they're there, and just a reminder of what they actually mean. So your organisation has a mission, a purpose, an objective, a reason it exists. It might have changed this year. It may be that you've pivoted and doing something different. Why does your organisation exist? Ask yourself the question, check that you understand what the answer is. What's the strategy or plan you've got to actually get your organisation to deliver their purpose? Whether it's a new one, whether it's an old one, is it still right? What's the structure you've got in place to do that? Does that still meet the requirements of where you thought you were going when you started out? And then the jobs are what the work and activity are that need to be done to achieve that. If you don't get the top bit right, you're not going to get the bottom bit right, and vice versa. They all feed back into each other and work up so that if you haven't got your jobs defined correctly and you don't know what work is supposed to be being done, individuals will not deliver that, and they will not deliver what your organisational purpose is. So it's a fundamental. So job analysis, which is another word for job design, what is it? It's about gathering information on the jobs that you have in your business, the work that is done, how things work together or don't, as the case may be. Looking at what you have, why it's doing it that way, why are you doing that, how could you do it in a way that means that you're meeting your business objectives, and then making sure you present it in a way that accountabilities for delivery of that work is done clearly, ideally consistently, and in a clear format so your individuals know what it is that they're expected to deliver. It then helps you to ensure that the work that you're providing them with is in line with that, and that you can then recognise excellent performance against that, and you can also ensure that people are performing as you expect. However, the job bit is about the role, not the person. This isn't about saying, what is it that Joe does down the street? It's what the job is that is being delivered for the organisation. The person in it will perform to one degree or another, and who you put in that job may impact on how well that job is delivered and the differences, but it's to remember that the role is the same role. How somebody delivers it is a different thing. So you're defining what the work is, not what the person is. So why do this at all? So there are a variety of reasons that job analysis exists. You may use it for recruitment, you might use it for talent management, you might use it for performance management. If you work on your objectives being these are the business objectives and they work through the golden thread down to the work at the bottom, your accountabilities in your job profiles should tie in to those objectives overall. And then your weekly, monthly, annual targets that people are expected to meet and objectives, SMART hopefully, will fit into those to make sure that you're actually delivering what's expected, and enables you to measure people effectively. It's used for training and development, so it can identify any gaps in where an individual sits against the work requirements, and job evaluation to ensure that you've got a fair pay structure and that you're paying fairly for the same work done in jobs that are of equal value. So the principles of job analysis. It's analysis, not a list. I've seen so many job descriptions that are just a list of tasks. It doesn't give you any context. It doesn't say the level of expectation of somebody. It just gives a whole list of tasks. Task lists have their place, and they're really useful when you're coming up with training materials to ensure that people are fully skilled. But the actual concept of what a job description is supposed to be is not that. It's about the roles, not the people. It's about facts, not judgment. It's not what do I think somebody should possibly do. This is what we need you to deliver. That's what's being delivered for the organisation overall. And it's also about what the job is now, not how it could or might be in a year or whatever. It's the work that you need at the moment, the work that is required for the job that you are recruiting for. How do you do it? Now, job analysis is a skill. Anybody can learn to do job analysis. What happens is that people have a go at it, and then you get people doing it in different degrees of expertise across an organisation, and it can be very difficult to make sure that you've got consistency in your approach. So however you choose to do it within your organisation, I highly recommend getting some expertise in, some training, and getting people who know what they're doing to write these so that they are fit for purpose for now and for the longer term. Job profiles themselves shouldn't change over time if the work hasn't changed, so they're not something that's going to be changing every week. You may change the person in it, you may change your focus slightly, but the actual jobs themselves would typically stay the same. So the approach you take will depend on how many jobs you're looking at, what sort of work it is you're doing. If you've got a lot of jobs that are very similar, then it won't take you quite as long and you can work them all together. You might want to look at grouping jobs together to determine how similar they are. If you've already got job profiles or descriptions, you might be reworking something rather than starting from scratch. That has positives and negatives, because you can sometimes be too blinded by what's in the existing thing rather than saying what it should be and what the work is now. And the formats aren't always necessarily the most helpful. What data sources and resources do you have available? Doing this activity does take time and money. Getting it right is important though, and for all those reasons of those other processes it impacts, if you don't get it right, all those things down the line will also not go well. And what's the expected quality level? Is it good enough? Is it got to be brilliant and perfect? In my experience, you can never get a job description perfect. You can get it right for now and good enough and clear enough that people understand the work, and that's really the base for me. Are you using the right data sources? So who you can get information from, who's available to speak to you, who's allowed to speak to you in some cases, will impact on the information quality that you get. If somebody's not close enough to the job, they won't know the detail behind it. But if they're too close to the job and maybe the person doing the job, they've got a slightly different bias and may want to put things in, and it ends up in a detailed list again rather than an overall view. Getting that balance is quite difficult to make sure that you've got the right information. That's a real skill in itself. Can people be impartial in the information they're giving you, or do they have their own agenda? And that's kind of cutting through do they want to make it a bigger job than somebody else's team because they think it's more important when actually it is the same job? I've talked about job descriptions and job profiles. I use the words interchangeably, most people do. There is a technical distinction though, in that a job description is more detailed. Job profiles are typically more an outline, high level view. You generally have a person specification included with a job description, but you could also have one with a job profile. So it doesn't really matter what you call them as long as you know what you mean, and as long as you're consistent within your own organisation and your own documentation. Talking about a job description, because that's the one that's got more detail in it, these are the items that you typically have within your job description. It sounds simple, but there are many job descriptions I've seen that miss some of these elements. It's really easy to do, but actually without having some of these elements, if you were to use it for job evaluation, for example, and to benchmark roles and to ensure that you have parity across your organisation, it is important to make sure that you cover these in some detail, but then not too much detail. It's a challenge. These items here highlighted are the ones that would typically be in most job descriptions. The other elements may be included and are a bit more subjective. If you just choose not to put them in, then that's entirely up to you. Now, I just wanted to give you a couple of examples of where this might not be quite so simple. So a job purpose is a single sentence summarising why the job exists. And this one is one of my favourites. I normally do training where I help people understand how difficult this is to actually write, to get it right the first time. And I rarely get these right the first time. There's a few iterations to get the words right and the length of it right. I describe this usually as the dinner party sentence. I appreciate we're not having many of those at the moment, but if you had to describe your job in one sentence, or describe the job you're defining in one sentence so that somebody else would entirely understand what it is that you do, how would you do that? So you haven't got many words, you've got to keep it simple, but you've also got to keep it so that it's not too technically special and that somebody would know what you actually do. So I had some examples of these. I was going to work on one about Father Christmas as what Santa Claus's job description. So I have let you think about what the job purpose, what you'd write about a job purpose for Father Christmas, and answers on a postcard, please. What I did do was identify this one. So what I typically do is come up with some words that I think this is what a Disney princess would need to do. And then I write some words around it and try and get to that purpose. This is what I came up with. Whether or not you agree with that or not, but if you try and do this for a job that you know really well, it's a lot easier than trying to do for a job you're not. Get yourself skilled in doing these ones and then you can work on the other ones. Guard dog. So I came up with that for this one. You can write a job purpose for anything. You just have to understand enough about what it does and why it's there. And then HR business partner, given our population, this may or may not be appropriate for some of you. But hopefully you'll recognise that as being relatively straightforward. I will be sending these slides out, so I will just flick through these. So in the terms of the context and the things you might have, what I wanted to show here is that just writing a few words doesn't make a job description. There is a lot of information that needs to go into it to make sure you cover enough information to tell people about the job and what it is that you're expecting. Covering all sorts of elements and areas, and you might go into some of these in more detail than others depending on your type of industry, particularly if you're working in one with a lot of health and safety constraints. Covering those frameworks and boundaries and the things that are needed to be done is very important to make sure you can manage those performance issues afterwards if there are any. And then working relationships, challenges, person specifications, and saying there about be careful, it's what the job requires, not what the current job holder is. So if you have a view in your head as to this is the job that somebody does, that doesn't necessarily mean that's the job that you need to be done. Person specification. Now, some words of warning on this. It's not necessarily included in every job, and some people really struggle with this one to keep it separate. But being consistent in your approach to this can really help in ensuring that you've got the right information in there. It's about the role, not the person. And I do make that point many times when I do my training. Just a quick word about from the legal side of things, you do have to be really careful with your person specification. How many times you've seen something, I need 10 years of experience in X, and you think, well, why? Why do you need that? If you can't justify it, it shouldn't be in there. There are some where there are minimum legal age requirements, obviously they're fine. Think about the qualifications, think about inclusivity and making sure that your equivalent status also applies to encourage applicants as far as possible. And you may have genuine occupational qualifications, and I would debate those with other people to determine if you think that they are actually there and realistically exist, and sort of take a reasonable person view of actually somebody else who came and looked at this would think that's the case. I'm conscious of the time, so I will dash through a couple of these. What are the key areas of the responsibility that a job has to do? So for me, this is about accountabilities are about the key things that people do, not a list of every activity, but what is it they actually do, why do they do it, and who's responsible for it, and what, their accountability is ensuring it's actually done. I saw a job profile for somebody the other day who was a landscape technician, so going out and mowing lawns and pruning trees. 21 key accountabilities. I can't believe that person truly has 21 key accountabilities. Now, if you're the manager managing that person, you've got a lot of things to work through when you come to review what their job is. And some of them were repeated. And for that individual as well, that's not necessarily the level of detail they need to understand whether or not they've done their job well either. So it's not useful for the individual or the managers. Accountabilities, identify what the outputs are of a job, focus on the results, what somebody needs to be doing and how. They should be timeless. They shouldn't be something that has an annual delivery cycle in them. The detail of that goes in your objectives. So these would say that they are responsible for delivering within budget. The specifics of that budget each year would then be specified in your objectives. They should be distinct, so not the same things, just repeated in a slightly different way. Ideally suggest a measurement, so think SMART objectives. Can I measure it? Would I know if I'm doing it well or not, or if it's been achieved? Specific to job and linked to that job purpose to again ensure that you've got that golden thread up to the organisational purpose. So very basic job accountability, verb, object, outcome. What am I doing? Who's doing it? And why? What's the point? And if you can't do that, what's the point? So it's the bit that often is missed, then you are missing the bit that helps you measure whether or not somebody's been successful. I have a 5-stage process I take people through when looking at how to write job accountabilities. The full details of what those steps are is included at the end of my slides because I didn't think I'd get time for it today. So each of the details of those steps I have included for you to have a look and just see what might get you to a point of being able to write these. Like I say, it's a skill and a talent to get to the point where you can write these confidently and know that you've got it right. It takes writing a lot of them, but it's something that anybody can learn how to do if they have the ability to understand the jobs and do that analysis element. So if you need help with any of this, this is a way as well of looking at how is the work being done, what do we do, why are we doing it. If you need help with that, job analysis, training and project support, change management, job evaluation, benchmarking to make sure that when you've got those jobs, you're paying and rewarding people effectively. I also do provide line manager and team leader type training and development, so very much practical on the ground. This is how you can make a difference with your employees, and also career development, which could be done on a corporate basis if you wanted to help people improve their career planning for themselves, and also on a personal basis if you know anybody. I have offered free CV reviews to people who have been a victim of redundancy through this COVID time. So if you know anybody, it doesn't have to be a chamber member, but I'm happy to give a free CV review if that's something that would be of benefit. My contact details are there. Please feel free to get in touch. And back to you, Yas.
Lovely. Thank you, Ruth. Thanks for sharing your knowledge as well. I hope everyone's found that useful. We are on time, which is great. Has anyone got any last minute questions? I've had a look in the chat box and there isn't any. So if anyone does have any questions, please pop them in there. In the meantime, I'm just going to say thank you to both of our speakers, Ruth and Darryll. I will be following up tomorrow with their slides and their contact details. I'd like to say thank you to Laura and everyone at Hewett Recruitment for their support with our HR forums and HR conference. I still don't think there's any questions. If you do have any questions, I'm going to put everyone's details on the follow-up email, so please contact them directly. I'm sure they won't mind. But thank you all. I hope you have a wonderful Christmas and a happy new year, as I probably won't see you now. But take care and thanks for joining today, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Yasmin.
Thank you. Thank you.
Everyone, bye.
Bye.